podcast.
Boom. What's up, people? Welcome to Creative Theory Podcast, the show that brings you conversations with visual artists about how they got to where they got, what their day-to-day is like, what their struggles are, thoughts in the art world, and a lot more. Today, very honored to have this designer, Canadian artist, who also does a lot of work with interior designers and brands, also active participant of Canadian art scene. Zoe Pawlak, thank you so much for joining the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're extremely busy, and welcome back to Vancouver.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be back in this city, so I'm thankful.
Were you originally from here, or no?
Yeah, I am. I was raised in a suburb of Vancouver and just spent the last 4 years working and living in Montreal, and it feels really good to be back home.
What was the reason to go to Montreal?
We wanted to go to Montreal because we wanted to have an adventure.
You're an artist, so
Yeah.
it makes sense. Yeah.
Have some fun, and we wanted our kids to learn French. Our kids are 10 and 12 now, so 4 years ago they were a little bit younger, perfect ages, we figured, to learn a new language and just have a good time. I had gone to Concordia for 2 years, so I was excited to revisit the city as an adult.
Wow, so you braved the travels with the kids as well?
Yeah, it was good.
That's amazing, very ambitious.
Yeah.
And then having experienced that also, what is the reason to come back?
Well, I mean, initially our son was having trouble studying in French. It's a difficult language, so it got more challenging as the years went on. And also, you know, my parents are here, and to have that support, and I felt it was time to come home.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
And then as far as art practice goes, do you think, how different will it be? What do you anticipate as far as changes go in artistic practice, having been in Montreal and now being back?
Yeah, I guess that was also one of the main reasons for returning, was that I was coming back. I was flying back here every 6 to 8 weeks to see clients and to work in my Vancouver studio, and so in a Vancouver studio. And so now I'm in the place where, you know, my work is most popular and I'm most well known. So it's a lot smoother. Sometimes you just have to go with the flow and go where things are good.
Yeah,
and people know my name here, and the response to my being home already has just been incredible. So I kind of had a feeling that it was time.
I'm very happy to hear it, because when I found out about you, I remember reading about you and that you were between Vancouver and Montreal, and I very much wondered how the structure occurred. But it seems like it's family and art basically.
There's
combining.
something, I mean, we'll probably talk about this because I know it's a topic that you're passionate about, but I think it's also important to build the community that you're in, and a lot of people leave Vancouver. Yeah. And so I wasn't I had to do what I had to do, but I also wasn't super proud of that decision in some ways. And I believe in making this city a better place and culturally more interesting. So I'm here to contribute to that. So.
I love it. I appreciate it. Actually, one of my earlier questions that I wrote down is that, do you plan to contribute to the local art scene?
Yes.
And I know you have been, but especially now that you're going to be here full time, it sounds like that is a conscious plan.
Yeah, I always make a concerted effort to contribute to whatever community that I'm a part of, but especially the arts and entrepreneurial community of Vancouver. It's very important to me, and I spend a concerted amount of effort and energy focusing on what the needs are and how I can best use any gift that I have, any experience that I have to contribute. Yeah. And
you still have the time for it?
I make the time for it. Generosity is built into the business plan. It's not something we do later.
You have to. How many people build generosity into their business plan? When you build a business, that's one of the things on there.
Yeah. Otherwise, you would never get to it. No, it's definitely, it's very, very important. So I prioritize that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I also wanted to know, I mean, actually, we'll get into balance overall, but whether you're going to be in Montreal or Vancouver, how much time do you think you're going to be spending, or we're spending, trying to be part of the art scene while making art? Because I feel like, I mean, if you start going to all the art shows and all the events, I personally find that then that time's got to go from somewhere, and it's got to be even harder for you because you also have kids. So
yeah, evenings and weekends are pretty precious to me, to our family, and so I would say I would attend events of course, if they were close, dear friends. And if the work was really, really, really interesting to me, of course, I would prioritize that. And, I never miss, for example, if Rennie's having an interesting show here, I won't miss that because I think it's a very unique opportunity to see stuff that you can't always see. Once we've all seen an exhibition thinking, oh my gosh, once this comes down, it either travels around or goes into the archives or is, kept away.
You may not ever see it again.
Exactly. It's a very, very special thing. And I aim to prioritize those kinds of things for sure.
Especially when shows are set up in a way where there's a component beyond just a work on the walls, where whether it's interactive or there's installation, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it seems to be so key to it.
Yeah.
I do want to talk about yourself and whether you plan to do art shows in the future here as well. But before we keep going, I want to make sure to, for people, if you want to check out your work, zoepawlak.com, ZoePawlak, and also on Instagram, Zoe Pawlak. And the reason I do want to talk about your work, it seems like you've done this, from what it looked like, a really cool transition from figurative to then abstract, and then it's almost like you're writing that fine line. Is that something that you do consciously?
Yeah, for sure. I think that when I was younger, I attended Langley Fine Arts School from grade 10, 11, and 12, and there was a real concentration on technique and learning the craft, which I'm very proud of and very, very thankful for. So, I went on to continue to study the nude, for example, for over a decade rigorously. And in my spare time, like as a hobby, I would go and do that instead of, say, going to the bar or going and doing something else. So I really made an effort in the beginning of my time learning how to be an artist, really learning how to draw. And that's super important. And from that place, I've come to abstraction and come to kind of undo things a little bit. But it's very important to me that I first knew how to put everything together. Yeah.
I was so happy to see it because myself as well, live drawing was just a huge part of learning, especially in the beginning. And it seems like any tradition, if you ever go to a traditional art school, live drawing is always going to be there. And unfortunately, sometimes it doesn't feel like it may even be enough because I don't know if you speak with students who are studying at the moment at certain schools, and sometimes they just get one semester and you're done.
Yeah.
That's nothing.
Yeah, definitely.
And then I think to what you said as well, live drawing basically helps in everything, like no matter what kind of art you do.
Yeah, I was just with one of my older teachers yesterday, and we were talking about how if you know how to see, if you can learn how to see, then you can learn how to draw. And so you're not drawing hands, you're just drawing what you're seeing. And so when you're able to translate that, then you have a greater capacity to take whatever emotional or experiential experiences happen to you and translate that into the work. But without the capacity to first see and be able to record that, you really have less tools in your toolbox. So you can't, in my opinion, you're not in the best position to say as much.
Mm-hmm. And then the difficult part is knowing when to start making a translation from drawing what you see to then allowing yourself to be like interpreting it.
Yes.
The way you see it, but that's where I guess style comes in and personality. Do you know when that happened for you? Do you remember?
Well, I think we have these like natural tendance or like a tendency. So if you think about, say, a singer, there's a certain range that your voice can move in most comfortably. And so your teachers would kind of ask you to stay within that realm, and then they would challenge you once they feel you're strong enough. They would challenge you to move out of that and kind of go into falsetto or go move among that range. And so I think good teachers provide you with both the skills within your abilities, your best abilities and your capacities, and then also push you further. And so I definitely had teachers that pushed me way beyond what I felt comfortable doing, and probably too early on. I was too young to really know what I was even wanting to say or how I wanted to experiment, but it's definitely helped me in the later years.
So it sounds like you did have really good teachers.
I had a handful of good teachers. I mean, I go and speak at universities, so I'm fairly, I'm around young people in that system. And for example, any of the staff that have worked for me or young people that have worked for me, they had just come out of art school. So I'm well aware of the shortcomings of art schools. And I think to know where their shortcomings are, where you kind of have to fill in. For example, if there's not enough figure drawing classes, you have to go out and find your own. there's a lot of ways in which art school doesn't cover everything. It doesn't have the capacity to, and that you have to fill in your own learning.
Okay. I think I'm going to do a little jump here because you brought this up as we had lunch on Friday, and you mentioned to me that you like business and art at the same time, and I thought it was so rare. And I imagine you're very good at business because, I mean, look at all the things you're doing. For people who don't know, it's from, like you mentioned, working with interior designers. You recently had a sculpture made, and then rug collection. It's incredible. And so, but having so what you're saying about schools, I guess I'm leading, but have you noticed that business is not very much taught in the art schools?
Most often when I speak at a university, I'm the first person who's spoken to those young people about money.
Wow.
And so when and if they have had something that within the school they call a professional practice class, often it's brief. And it also covers a few topics like how to do your taxes, how to apply for grants, and how to get into galleries. And so if you want to operate outside of the gallery system, for example, or you want to learn how to grow your Instagram, or you want to learn how to, paint crazy things, cats on skateboards, and how to learn how to sell those in Japan, you need to have other people around you who can teach you about business and what's possible. So yes, I've definitely made an effort to be present in that way around any young people who are hungry to learn that, because the young people are changing and shifting so much faster, as fast as the world is going around them. And the schools remain the same in terms of that curriculum around business.
Very unfortunately. I guess any big institution, it's a lot harder to make drastic changes, right? Unless you really start over, but you can't. And then I think the gallery scene being so just competitive, most artists, when they get out of school, if they plan to go into the fine art realm, they'll just have to figure it out some other way, right? Yeah,
and there's a gap missing between what I've noticed after school and before the professional world. And so that's where places like we both know Thrive Studios, where they're supporting artists, for example, in those spaces. And that time is really, really formative. And yet a lot of young artists find themselves very much alone. So let's say they can get into a studio and they do have some paints and they have a little bit of drive. They're often discouraged at some point along that journey and feel that they don't have enough support.
It's very difficult, especially because the art practice is so solo and lonely to start with, right? Yeah. And if nobody accepts you, which that's a story of artist, right? Artist life.
Yeah. I don't know. I kind of made a career out of not believing that sentence, and I think that we have a great opportunity in this time to not believe that and to not ride that and to make our own. Make our own way. So. Yes, all of the galleries that I applied to when I first got out of school did not accept me. And then, eventually a few years later down the road, I found the right one that was a good fit for me. So it's just about, perseverance in that sense.
It is very, very important. And how do you, as we're talking about learning, how do you continue to kind of teach and challenge yourself? Because you're saying good teachers help people, help push you and find that voice. How do you manage around that?
That's a great question. There's two things I do. One, I hang out with some of the most interesting and intelligent people on planet Earth living in this moment. I'm a diehard friend. I love being people's friends. And at the same time, if I find you interesting or that you and I have chemistry or something in common, I will relentlessly pursue that friendship. And so I hang out with some great people. I do believe you are the company that you keep. And also I actively read. I spend a lot of time reading and learning. So if there's something missing, if I'm missing information and I don't know a ton about something, then I will study it with a focus for a period of time in my life.
How do you know what you're missing?
So for example, if someone says a lot of big words to me around a certain topic, or something comes up, like we just had that report come out on climate change, and I didn't really understand a lot of the pieces of that, I will make an effort. So I'll say, okay, November, I'm going to kind of study around this. Or people that I'm around, if they're like, don't you know about this topic or what's going on? Or, if my accountant is explaining something to me and I can't quite understand it, I'll, go and ask her what book to buy and figure out how to learn around that.
And when it comes to artistic practice, when you're talking about learning, it sounds like those two are not separated. When you're talking about learning and learning what you're missing, is that directly connected to what your art and the outcome of it is going to be? Because, or are they separate?
The way I study, if we're talking about studying painting, for example, I will go and make an effort to go and see Carrie James Marshall's show in New York. While I'm there, I will make sure that I see that show, and at the same time, I'll make sure I see it at Rennie's, and then I will study his work, and I will come to understand, there's that which I like, which is the impulse of the attraction to something, and then from that place, I'll come to try to understand how that person made that. And that to me is like the pursuit of studying painting, right? What gets you excited and what gets you jacked. That's super different for me than studying business, for example.
Like true student.
Yeah, all of us. No, we have to.
Well, you have to be.
You
having
have to.
some more so than others, and you just got to look up to those people.
Yeah, well, curiosity is the great gift, and that's I was given an innate curiosity, and I also feed that curiosity. So it's both.
And then I guess it makes sense you're an artist.
Yeah.
It all fits. And at this point, do you know what you like when you're talking about if you see an artwork? Do you know what it is you're usually drawn to?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't know ahead of time. We've all been walking through a gallery and been surprised by something that sort of takes your breath away or starts to make you cry, or you're like, what is this thing? And my first experience with that was when I was 18 and I went to London and I had no idea who Rothko was. And I walked into that room and there's I think 8 paintings in this massive gray room, and just started bawling my face off. And they're just soft, fluffy rectangles. I mean, they're really they weren't about anything particularly, figurative or with an exact narrative. So I had no idea why I was having this cathartic experience. And then I went on to study, to learn about Rothko. And he claimed that he could have you transcend your body and have the spiritual move through you, and that he could do that through color field painting. And he was determined. And so studying that after having had that happen to my body was a trippy, that's the trippiest experience, because it's non-representational. So that was just what it just took, and that also, that was a very formative moment in the sense that I decided at that point, I could use this silent medium to move people and to share my experiences. That was very moving to me.
I'm really curious in that moment when you saw those pieces, whether, whether it's is it your interpretation that completes the piece and makes the piece what it is, or was it, I mean, what you're saying clearly, it was his intention to move people, but I really often wonder the pieces that are not representational, the amount of reaction and interpretation that people can get is so varied that I wonder, how much of your reaction to them was, you know what I mean? Like, was it your interpretation, or did it line up exactly with his intent for those pieces? Yeah,
I don't think that. I mean, there was definitely a dance between him and I. That he was dead. And I was, so there was something that happened between what he left me to witness and see, and then what I felt from that, for sure. In the same way that a songwriter would leave us a song, or a playwright would leave us a play, he was leaving me something to experience. And yes, in answer, that's a beautiful way to think of it, is that the viewer completes that experience, for sure. And I've seen that in my own work. I've seen people move to tears in front of my own work, or purchase it because they're so moved, and they permanently bring that into their home. And that's one of the most touching things somebody can do, is to acquire something permanently, and also say thank you, and I see myself in this, and thank you for expressing that, so that I can't physically make this myself, my clients, but they'll say thank you for doing that on my behalf.
And at the same time, they're investing in you, and they're supporting your art practice to keep making that. Yeah. It is really great. I think that's why art shows are so valuable. Yeah. There's definitely many ways to get your work out there these days, but what the reaction you're talking about and people's experiences with your work, I mean, you won't get it unless, you're at an art show where you're bringing physically a piece to someone, right?
Yeah. It's being at your own opening is a strange experience, in that usually you're sort of done saying what you wanted to say with that body of work, and at the same time, for those who are seeing it, it's their first time experiencing it. So it's a strange kind of place between, I made that almost a year ago or a couple months ago, and you're sort of through it and moving on to the next body of work usually. But there's pieces in there that people really, really want to talk about, and so you have to kind of hold that space for them.
That's and when you see people's reactions, especially extreme reactions to pieces you are not expecting to have those people react to. I've been thinking about this a lot, whether you leave the door open to that body of work to be completed through the insight that you get from the people who come to the art show. You know what I mean? And what I've been thinking after my last art show, I've noticed, there's really surprisingly really just a couple of pieces that people kept coming up to me and saying, can I, they loved it, or some people want to buy the piece. And it's at that point understanding why they liked it. And then there's this battle then. It's, do you embrace what people like?
And make money? Yes.
Or, and, even, sure, let's say, like, even if I'm able to, but do you make money with it? But beyond it is just, for the ego, for making work that's successful, whatever that means. Clearly, some pieces were. And then the difficulty is, do you embrace it? Because then you're letting the public dictate what you make. And it doesn't have to be, I know I'm phrasing it as a negative thing. I don't think it is. It's just how you perceive it and what you do with that information. Anyways, there's no question there, but have you found that in your experiences?
Yeah, I mean, essentially that's been there is a question there, because that's been my whole entire practice has been, how much do I respond to, what sort of people are responding to? And boxing out in the sense of, I've had to be sort of a pioneer in that space of saying, this is important enough to carry. Like, if somebody sees something special in something and there's a thread of something there, should I go and pursue it? Is sort of what I understand you saying, and sort of respond to their the appetite that they have for that. And I've done it and I've not done it, and throughout the 12 years that I've been making work, it's, there's not one recipe, but it can be interesting, and it can also lead you astray and waste your time.
Of course. It's a relationship, right? With with the audience, I guess, with the audience and yourself, and then just understanding what makes a piece successful, right? Yeah. Because the way you would study art history and studying some pieces and find out, why this. Like, why is Mona Lisa versus everything else, and then and sometimes you don't even get a clear answer. Let's be honest, right? Because it's so subjective.
I've definitely had this experience where, because as you know, so I sell, I about 50% of my income comes from custom work for private clients and interior designers, and about 50% of my work is just straight up sold, off my website or through knowing me or through shows. And all that to say that of the work that I just straight up make that people purchase, once upon a time there was my most liked photograph on Instagram, my most liked painting, it sold within a few minutes, let's say. That's very rare. But it sold right away, and it left my studio. And there was information in that painting that I needed in order to make the next pieces, right? So I did myself a disservice by something being sold so quickly. Artists might be like, oh, that's like the best case scenario.
Yeah, for sure.
But it left the studio, and then I didn't have the sort of soul of that and the information from that to go on to make the next body work. And I know it was very detrimental at this important moment where I was kind of shifting into this body of figurative work that could have been well served to have had that other piece around.
That's a pretty interesting lesson. So you must have been in a time of exploration.
Yes, yeah,
and then
exactly.
playing around, I guess, at that time.
Exactly, yeah.
It's really hard to harness. Sometimes you have to really analyze it, right? Yeah. What happens, and it seems like, at least, especially in your later work, there seems to be a lot of sense of play. The way you work with oil, so I'm sure you do. It allows you to move the paint around for quite a long time. And
Yeah, it's wonderful. And I mean, the more you get to know your medium, whatever it is, if you've been doing something for 12 years, you know how to, if you're a dancer, you know how to move your body in a certain way. So you can kind of step into different, you have a greater capacity to step into different ways of moving that look to everybody like their freedom, but it's actually come from a lot of training, right? It's like rigorous training. And now I can kind of play more, but it's active and it's conscious, and it's sort of, and I can also, time and money afford you the space to play as well. Let's be honest. Like, it's a privilege. Leisure time is a privilege, and so I'm getting a little more of that these days.
Very good. And so you mentioned the 50-50 split financially. Is that do you like how it plays? What would be your ideal situation?
Well, in my ideal situation, I would be a singer-songwriter who plays basketball part-time and lives in LA. But if you're asking within the sort of setup that I have going on currently, I'm very pleased with what's happening. I would like to make more inventory. You know, I think that the custom work is awesome. I love my clients and I have so much fun making it. But I think if I had more time, was able to prioritize more time to have more inventory, I would have a bit more of a successful next season. So that's what I'm focused on in the next little while.
Are you actually writing music?
I write, yeah.
Write and sing?
Yeah.
That's really cool.
It's top secret though.
Well, yes, it
not
is.
Not anymore.
I won't tell anyone. That's amazing. So you're a true artist.
I don't know.
It's like we talked about during lunch. Is that I think, when I meat people who are just excited about the art in general as a way of being, is that you want to pursue all these different ways of expressing yourself, right? Because I guess that's what it comes down to. And I used to play drums. I love music. I always trying to pick up an instrument, but it's just because it's art and it's so beautiful and it's so different, right? But just a different way of expressing yourself.
I think also when you're a sensitive soul, or you yourself have been moved by so many mediums, you yourself have been changed by a certain song, or you've been completely there's books that have completely and entirely changed, like paradigm shifted my life. And so therefore, of course I want to write, because I want to find whatever medium is, you want to master whatever medium is the best way to say what it is that can move people, So it gets exciting and it's addictive, because it's like you get stoked, right? Because you can see the capacity for people's minds and hearts to change. It's cool.
Oh, yeah. And especially once you get past the hurdle of just gaining the skill, because if you're good at one type of art and you switch and you're like, oh, this is incredibly hard.
Of course I am a very mediocre poet. Wow.
Oh, well, there's plenty of time to
10,000 hours.
And then more so, right?
Yeah.
And then triple that. And that's the thing about looking at the world of art, and you never see that number attached to the piece of work. You don't know if you see an artwork that was by a person who had 40,000 hours of, or they had 5,000. And maybe,
I think what's been, what might be of interest to you, and what's been a bit of a challenge for me lately, is I have this phrase written up in my Montreal studio, and it says, I can no longer say everything that I want to say with painting because it is expensive, acquired privately, and silent. So what happens is that when you start to become honest about what the medium's downfalls or shortcomings are, it's you have to be honest. And so one of the challenges for me, being sort of a somewhat public figure, in that, as much as you can be as a painter, my clients are looking at my Instagram, or people are looking to what I'm saying and what I'm thinking about. And sometimes some of the struggles that I'm facing with the medium itself or with the business, I can't be as open about that. So it's all the more important that I have, colleagues and peers that I'm able to talk to privately about that.
I guess it's just strange how it becomes. The more successful you are, the less you can talk about. I guess the hardships. I
try to be fairly open. I try to, I think people appreciate, for example, on my Instagram, I'm very open, for example, about the fact that I quit drinking a few years ago, and I'm fairly open. Mothering isn't always a dream. I'm very open about, I'm not super concerned with my own vanity, etc. So, I've tried to leave on every platform. I try to be as transparent as possible, but there's processes that I'm going through professionally and personally that are difficult to talk about in the moment, because you have to kind of maintain both the value of your work and the continuity of the career.
And then there's a question of, how do you know if this is going to benefit or damage your reputation by opening up about something, right?
And do I care, right?
Or exactly.
You do pause and you go, it's easy to talk openly about sobriety, and I had to obviously choose if I was going to say that. And the second I opened my mouth about it, of course, A, everybody supported me, and B, I saw so many people moved by that, by my just simply saying, this has been an experience that I've gone through, that I wouldn't take that back or change that for the world. But is there a risk there? Yeah, but then you are the one who has to decide whether or not you care about what would anybody think about that, and
I
what
guess
would their
should,
judgment,
right?
we would like to believe that we wouldn't care, but I do think that, of course we all are human, and we pause. And
it's exactly that. But in fact, you're showing yourself to be more human publicly, because you get to choose, you get to show whatever you want to show on Instagram or whatever, in public in general.
Yeah.
And you're not going to lie that it's not artificial is not the right word. It's curated, right? You get to you get to choose what parts of your life you show, right? And so when you would like reveal a very human aspect of like you said, sobriety, what does that do? Just people get to see you more as a person, basically.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm always curious. Did that change your artwork? Did it reflect back?
You know what I will say? I think that what's important, what I do know is that artists often underestimate their body. Like, your body is the way that you make the work, right? And so not only is it rigorous and physical, our job, my job is very rigorous and physical. I have to lift things, and I'm, at the end of the day, I'm very tired. So it's in my best interest to be like fit and strong and that kind of thing. But if you think about, like, a lot of artists I know, for example, don't exercise or don't eat well or whatever. And it's not, it's not here to say, that it should be one way or the other. It's just to think about the fact that the work actually moves through your physical body. So it's, it should be maybe considered more often.
And a lot. I completely agree with you. I work in my full-time is animation industry, and people sit by computers, it could be 12 hours. Yeah. If it's a really, like, crunch time, and you're so right. And then in the end is just, the way you make a living is this thing you're in this body.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like, in the same, and I know it's not the same as being an athlete, but if you can't imagine an athlete, like, not recognizing that, oh, right, this is a body that I use to do this thing, right?
And it helps to keep it up and running.
Exactly, right? Like, basic maintenance, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And you definitely, you start recognizing your good and bad days, and then I imagine it comes to everyone at different points of realizing, like, wow, this day really sucked, and I'm trying to figure out why. Because you probably, like, sat all day and just had some terrible food and just treated yourself terribly. Yeah.
Well, I think that so a lot of young artists or emerging artists will approach me, and they're looking for the most likely best outcome. Right. And so often they'll get themselves a studio, and they'll get enough money, and they'll get the right canvases, and they're like very concerned with all these different things. And I think often the body is not sort of thought of as important as it should be. Yeah.
I wish I had better memory for these quotes, but there's quotes of how you should keep your body in mind. I'm butchering it. I'll have to look it up in a little bit, because I know it may have been like Aristotle or something like that, speaking about the importance of keeping the body and the mind kind of in the best state possible, and pushing yourself to be the best. I'll look it up. Maybe I'll just post it on Instagram later, so you can don't hold me to
We're going to catch it. Well, there is a quote that I really like by Flaubert, and he says, be orderly and be regular and orderly in your life, so that you may be violent and original in your work. So this is sort of
powerful.
It's a good one. It's like, okay. But I will tell you, having become more recently happy, it is way harder. There's less content to paint about, because it's a lot more boring.
So what you're telling me is that drinking helps.
Yeah, it really does. Like, keep the chaos going for as long as possible. No, there's something about, like, being able to be self-destructive and be able to, like, have woes and struggle and longing and lust and all of those things. They're great content for making excellent work. So
you got to find new ways.
Yeah.
I was going to say, you got to find new ways to create chaos for yourself. What is it going to be?
I refuse to be a cyclone of chaos, so I'm not really sure yet. But I do know that it's really kind of. My friend and I were recently texting the other day about how boring it is being sober, and just embracing that and admitting it, and just really being like finding different ways to kind of stir things up.
Yeah. I'm trying to think, because it's about the experiences, right? That, or just like altered experiences, and then you.
For sure.
Or altered ways of viewing it.
Inebriation is a good way,
Okay. And when you say you're sober, are we talking no drugs? You're in the land of marijuana now?
Yeah. Well,
No. Okay. I got you. I'm just saying,
I run no risk of getting addicted to pot, because I don't really like it that much, but it doesn't mean that I won't partake.
So I'm just wondering, if you're going to find ways. Doesn't really work for me.
No, I'm not really that interested because I'm so excited about being right here, right now. I think that it's so much fun to be in the present moment. So there is something really about once you get there, it's just like the best sunset. It's like, why would you want to go anywhere else,
I got you.
Yeah.
Do you ever have to slow yourself down if you're so energetic and...
Yeah, I think people find me obnoxious. Like I'm sort of annoying in my enthusiasm for life. My name literally means life. It means God-given life, and I have this, great like insatiable thirst for life. And so I do have to check myself, but in the same breath, I try to kind of keep myself around people who are excited by that, because I don't want to make myself small just because it's kind of annoying to the person next to me.
Of course.
So
it's like you said, you got to find the right people
exactly
around you.
Yeah.
No pressure from your parents giving you that name.
Yeah, exactly.
She's going to do great.
They're like, you can do anything you want. I'm like, oh my God, it's too much pressure. It was a lot of pressure, yeah.
Was it actually?
Yeah, I mean, it was like, I'm a classic firstborn eldest girl, and I'm raising an eldest girl now. She's very powerful, and it's a lot of pressure. Yeah, it's a lot of, I really make a point to not have her sort of feel all of that pressure, but it's inevitable.
Is there battles?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And beautiful battles. And today, she just said to me today, my favorite thing about talking with you is you always are able to see things from various perspectives. And that's my favorite kind of people to have conversations with. Wow. And she's 12. So I just was like, mic drop.
You got to take all the credit for it too.
Yeah, no, we talked about nature and nurture and about how she's half and half, and no, I won't take credit for that one. She's got her own mind. She's very strong.
That's such a mature thing to say.
I know. It was so weird. She's like, that's my favorite thing about you.
Adults won't say this kind of stuff.
I know.
In fact, that's the cause of the problems these days, is that people just choose to see a thing from one side.
Yeah, totally.
Well,
she'll be running seminars next week.
She's going to be running something,
yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I had so many questions. I actually haven't even looked at I usually plan it out, but I kind of like how we're moving around. I love it.
Yeah.
Before I move on, were your parents supportive of you pursuing the artwork, the art world?
Yes, every day. I'm so thankful for my parents. They themselves weren't particularly in the arts. My dad is a professor and an educator and a writer and academic, and my mom was the head of Parks and Recreation for our community. Oh. And so I have a lot of those tendances, like the tendencies within them that they taught me as well. I see that now because I coach girls basketball and I like to move my body, and there's different ways that my mom's work and my dad's work have definitely come full circle to influence the sort of well-rounded life that I have, but not exactly in painting, Mm-hmm. But yeah, they said I could be anything I wanted, so, and supported that. And the big thing was carpooling me out to Fort Langley for grade 10, 11, and 12. That was awesome, and just letting me have the car and driving all that way.
Worth it.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Thanks, Mom and Dad.
Yeah, they're the best. They're great. All
right, so I guess we'll shift gears a little bit. You got to tell me how you make a bronze sculpture and how you team up to do that. How did that come around, actually?
That's a fun question. So my first collaboration was with Jeff Martin, and we made some furniture together. We made a hand-painted credenza, and so Jeff is super skilled at what he does, and I paint, and so we just sort of put this simple idea together. And then about 3 years ago, and I enjoyed that process of collaboration very much, and I was saying to you the other day at lunch that to me collaboration is both people being excellent at what they do and then pairing those things together. And let's see, it comes from a question for me of, is it possible that we could make something even more excellent, and getting super stoked about that and the potential for that outcome. And so I had this idea in my sketchbook about 3 years ago. I was wondering if I could make a bronze drawing, and I was going to my clients' homes and going to shows all over New York and in LA and seeing that there was what was missing in the market was there was a lot of pieces like bronze wall sculpture and mirrors, etc., that had these hard surfaces, but they didn't have any sort of femininity or organic shapes or vulnerability. And I wanted to know if I could make something that was both powerful and vulnerable at the same time, and if I could do that in bronze. And so I hired a ceramicist, an amazing woman, and her and I worked together, and she essentially made my drawing out of oil clay, but just raised off of the board. Wow. And then we had it cast at foundry in Quebec. And so it was a great pleasure to get to work with these guys in Quebec.
Wow.
And
it's quite a process.
It was quite the process, yeah. Yeah, that's why it took 3 years, because
is that what it took? Wow.
Too.
Yeah. And then, well, actually, first, I think what you captured, although it's not vulnerability, I think what you managed to capture is you're able to make bronze look light and airy.
Yes.
You know, and then when you're talking about when you saw the bronze pieces that are just solid, heavy, right, and it seems to you've achieved something opposite, which is great. I think your drawings, especially the figurative work, I don't remember the name. I really like those because once again, you get a glimpse, it's a human, it's a body, and then you take it away into abstraction. I thought it was really cool.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It looked amazing. I would love to. Well, how big is that bronze sculpture?
The sculpture, this one is 2 feet by 3 feet, but we're going to make some new ones that'll be bigger, and it's quite ambitious. I mean, you have to, we have a colleague of ours in Chicago named Stephen Hollenbeek, and I had the great pleasure of getting to see his work this summer in Chicago, and sort of like a 30-foot piece. I don't remember, but it's very large. It's like the size of a massive wall that a client had purchased, and so it was made out of something like 36 pieces that were then soldered together. So it's you're asking a lot of the foundry, and even in this piece, when you mention the sort of softness or gentleness of the line, I really pushed the foundry, like the gentleman who actually oversaw making the piece. When I first sent that piece to him, when it was made in oil clay, I was like, "Can you make this?" And I knew it was possible, and he said no right away. And then I worked him back. So I have this like capacity, and sometimes it comes across as being sort of maybe bossy, or like, I don't know what the word would be, but I really push people around me to do their best work possible. And I know I did that with him. I really pissed him off because I was like, I think this is possible, like keep trying, or try harder. And he was able to do it. And then I was like, see, thanks.
It worked.
Did it. It worked.
Got it done.
And he's like, well, it'll be more expensive. And I'm like, okay, perfect. Let's just do it. Let's make it happen. So I think that tenacity has been a real advantage in my career. And then especially in mediums that I don't understand that well,
Yeah. And then how, from now that it's complete, what is the goal? The goal is not for it to be a one-off, right?
No. The goal is that people can order them. People have been ordering them. So it's like, but the goal is, now I've seen it. I think that's the other thing about collaboration, is you haven't seen it until it's done, right? So it was mailed to me, and I was literally hadn't seen it before, right? So it's this idea that you get this thing shipped to you, and you're like, oh, well, there it is. This thing I sort of thought about for years, and it either is or isn't in various ways how you thought it would be. And so same with my mirrors. I worked with a bunch of people on my mirrors, and there's things that you want to change, and then you just evolve the work exactly like our practice. Except you're not doing it with your own hand. So it requires a more concerted effort with your communication. So describing to somebody exactly how you want something to feel. But I had practice in that I had worked. So I've released 3 rug lines, which I guess we can talk about as well.
Let's do it.
But I worked very closely with Ainsley, the actual rug designer. So her and I work really closely with each other. We have to communicate, and you have to figure out how to tell people what it is that you're trying to say. So. And
then one thing I'm very curious is that, so a little bit more on the business side of doing this, whether it's making selling rugs or sculptures, how do you make that part of the business work? How does that work?
I don't know. Well, I only know I've brought my business up to the point where I can. So the business, whatever you see online, is like me bringing it. It's me bringing it to the best of my capacities and knowledge and capabilities. But I do know, I'm well aware now. This last year, my word for this year is partnerships, because I'm well aware that I need someone else or a couple other people to take my career to the next level, whether that's galleries or advisors or business partners or investors or whatever. I need some more insight. And so that's another reason why I'm back in Vancouver as well, is to sort of tap into our group of colleagues and peers who are functioning at quite a high level, and get to have meetings with them and create time and space so that we can kind of see what's possible next, because I can only do so much on my own.
And that's what I was going to say. There's only so many hours in a day too, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And you're very ambitious, clearly, so you need more hours in a day by surrounding yourself with good people.
Totally, yeah. Well, and also that someone has spent, 10 or 20 years studying or learning this one thing. So why, it would be their great pleasure to pass that information on, right? Just as it is for me. So it's the same.
Also, I think you're the first artist I met who you said you had staff, and especially you were talking about your space in Montreal. Do you mind talking about that?
Yeah,
no,
it's my pleasure.
Yeah.
So in Montreal, I had the great pleasure of having a 1,200 square foot studio, which I still have.
So good. You still have it.
It's a large studio. This is this little thing.
It's a dream.
It's a dream, and that's why I'm keeping it. And
nice.
It's beautiful, and 16-foot ceilings, and this really nice view. But all that to say that it was a beautiful space. Part of going to Montreal was to get to have that opportunity to get to practice having a practice like that and seeing if it was something that I actually even wanted. And so I had a full-time studio manager at all times, and I still have a studio manager here in Vancouver. And then we would hire people according to how busy the practice was. So we would have somebody in, 2 days a week to do shipping, for example, or 1 or 2 days a week to do bookkeeping, or whatever it was that, however the business was scaling up, we would hire accordingly. And so at various times we had it was either myself and whoever was the studio manager. So it was always a minimum of 2 of us, and then up to 4 or 5 sometimes, just depending on what we were doing.
See, that's exactly that thing that nobody talks about, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, because, scaling your art practice and business at the same time,
Yeah.
I've never heard of it. I'm happy to have you here to talk about it.
Well, if you think about like Andy Warhol's factory, that's like a kind of a funny example, or like a really extreme example. And then if you think of the easier thing to think about would be any other small business. If you're at a sock store and you don't work there every day all by yourself, right? So you hire somebody. Once you sell enough socks, you start to hire somebody on Thursdays and Fridays to kind of come in and work for you, right? So it's just natural.
Yeah. Actually, the artist Brendan McGannity, who was here, I remember being in studio with him and seeing how his business was growing, because one day there was a person in the studio I didn't know, and they're just doing shipments. They're just shipping products. I was like, yeah, dude, that's it. I'm happy for you. Keep building.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
you have to.
Yeah.
And it's fun for them. Like I created the exact job that I would want to have if I was 25 and a half years old living in Montreal. So they were sort of like between 22 to sort of 25, 26. And we had, it was free food. There was food every Monday. It was no bras, like lady wrap all the time. You could wear your shoes or not. We talked about politics and gender and race and everything that we wanted to, everything that was important to us. And it was a really beautiful environment to work in. And I, created that with these humans, which was just awesome. So it's creative in and of itself.
It's amazing, especially speaking about being surrounded by the right people, or even just being surrounded by art all day, and it's really valuable versus other jobs you could have picked up that do not contribute to your practice at all. Right?
And I know that for as hard as they work, because they worked very hard, and also there was like a great benefit for them being in that space and being around not only me but around each other, because they got to learn a lot from each other. And so we would have dinners together, etc., and they've become friends with each other, and sort of I just would sit there and bask in the glory of how intelligent and incredible they are. They really are. We're incredible young women.
And then how do you manage to still keep that space, or how do you plan to be visiting back quite a lot?
So I just got back here to Vancouver, so I'm just experimenting with keeping this space, and I don't know that it's going to be a permanent decision, but for example, last week I was there painting by myself, and I produced over $20,000 worth of work, and I was able to ship things. So I didn't sell that work necessarily, you know what I mean? But I'm just experimenting with keeping it and what that might look like. And I also hosted some studio visits with humans from Montreal. So without that space, I wouldn't have been able to have those contacts in and have them kind of come by and see.
Yeah, and it just got to keep professional, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. If there's no space for them to kind of come and see stuff, then it's tough to kind of be able to grow my markets there. And it was about growing my markets in Toronto and New York as well. I spent a lot of time in New York over the last 4 years, and that was part of why I was in Montreal. It was
so much closer.
It was a very conscious decision. So
I was gonna say something. Just to add to keeping the studio, it's because once you start treating yourself as a professional and take this art pursuit professionally as well, I feel like a studio is kind of a must, right? Just because when you are meeting clients, it's not just about the painting. I think it's how you present yourself, and it seems like it's inevitable, and you kind of have to. I think it kind of sucks that it's so far away from you.
Yeah, I know. And we'll see. Like, I might get rid of it and then just have a bigger studio in Vancouver, because right now I'm in a tiny studio in Vancouver. So I was just like, it's the kind of studio you would have if you were like 22 years old. So it was funny. I was with a client there this morning, and we're like moving pieces around and we're cramped in this tiny space, and it's not classy at all. It is not like a lady studio. It's a little bit, So we'll see if I can even sustain that and, make it possible. So we'll see.
I like that you described it. It's not a lady studio.
It was not it was not lady things.
And right now you're working on a giant piece too at the same time.
It was, it's done. That was the piece we were moving around I'm trying to show this client their little, 24 by 24 inch piece, and I'm moving this 8 foot by 3 foot piece, like monstrosity, and it's taking up the whole studio.
It's okay. You're showing off.
Exactly. Yeah. It was like, what? No, trying not to, but trying to keep it out of the way.
Like, look at the work I'm making right now.
Yeah.
Let me move this out of the way.
Yeah.
Okay, you mentioned New York, so I think that's a natural segue to the gallery and the gallery representation that you have there. I think I wrote it down somewhere.
Yeah, Uprise.
Uprise, that's right. How did that come around?
Once upon a time when I was a young emerging artist, I would submit to anything and everything online, and it was early days for the internet. I don't know if you even remember, but it was 2007 when I first started my career, and it was blogs were just coming out. There was no Instagram. I didn't have a phone. So it was a very, very, very different landscape. And I submitted to everything under the sun. Like, I always say, if your name had interior designer in it or on the website at all, I submitted to you in 2007 for sure. And one of the things I submitted to was called Buy Some Damn Art by Kate Singleton. And Uprise found my work through her blog and website, and then ended up contacting me, and I've been with them for 6 years.
Wow. And so 6 years must be a pretty great relationship now, right?
Yeah, it's good. Yeah. It's good. It's a great relationship. They're extremely professional, and we have a lot in common. So they're great. They're wonderful. And
what kind of structure is it? Do you send them the work and they have a catalog of your work, or has it been doing shows?
That's a good question. They're a little bit of a less traditional brick and mortar gallery. They have their own space that's permanent. They call it the Loft, and so they work there. And there's lots of art there, and different ways that clients can come by and visit and come and see the works. They do it more on a by appointment only kind of basis, and then also they're very active in lots of art shows and fairs. So they get down to Miami and they do different shows. So they'll bring any one of our work around and. Yeah, they're good.
That's what you expect. I mean, that's what you would want from a gallery, right?
Yeah,
where they do the work to move your work.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So what people always say, for example, because of course when I sell my own work, I make 100% of the profit, and with them it's a 50-50 split. And people are always like, "Whoa, that's a crazy amount of money to give a gallery." And I'm like, not if you know them and know how hard they're working, and you see it's like, and they access clients, for example, that I never would. We had my work photographed in Carly Kloss's office, for example, in New York, and it's like I didn't even know who that was, and my staff were all excited, and our team was stoked. So it was, there's fun stuff like that they have access to that I have no interest in, and B, even if I did, no capacity to kind of reach that wealthy or just like kind of high profile client.
I guess it's exactly that. If they're reaching people that you wouldn't, then why would
value.
You not? Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I wonder how many galleries do that.
Yeah.
And it's that's where also I feel like this kind of aspect is not talked about enough, or it always seems to be shrouded in mystery of how these relationships occur.
Yeah, it's, I don't know a ton about the gallery system, but I've hung around with enough artists that are a part of various galleries, and the good ones are good and the bad ones aren't working that hard.
There you go. Yeah.
Right? And the other thing is that but the shrouded in mystery is a good point, because sometimes it takes time, it takes years to get inside of a gallery and then go, wait a minute, this person isn't hustling my work, or this person isn't, have my best interests in mind. And so never mind any sort of like shady behavior that happens, which it does, like as an artist not getting paid. which happened recently to a friend of mine. He had to sue his gallery in Montreal, and you know, there's all sorts of situations like that happening. But even best case scenario, when the artist is in what's so-called quote unquote a good relationship with their gallery, the gallery has like sometimes 30 or 40 artists on their roster, and they're not always hustling your work. So you do have to make your own efforts to sell your own work.
And yeah, and I guess
and just raise your name, I guess, is the.
And in the end, you got to keep in mind that it's a business, right? So I think
100%.
It's easy to forget, but I think that is why people do get in and don't get in, because in the end, it's just, will the product move? It's unfortunately or fortunately, that's just how it goes.
I think that the other thing is like that once you're in, even like this isn't saying anything negative about my gallery, but they will get the best piece for their client. And often that's not mine in both the client's opinion and their opinion. And that's fine. That's natural and normal. But just remembering that like once you're in, it's not like a free paycheck every month, right? They're going to do the best that they can with any of the ones that they're able to choose from the roster. And that's a lot of competition, you know, even within the gallery itself.
I guess it's not as glamorous as it seems.
No.
Basically. That's what you're saying. And I think it's kind of cool that you do sell across the border. It must be also a pretty nice perk to it.
Yeah, I like traveling in the U.S. and so it's fun to go to L.A. and New York and that's fun. I had a show with Uprise in Dallas a little while ago, and so I went to the Rothko Chapel in Houston. So I did the trifecta. I did 3 cities in Texas just because I was down there anyway. So it's fun. I'm able to kind of take a long layover or try to kind of hustle my way into figuring out how I can travel with my work, which has been a great blessing too.
Do you make a point, or do you try to conscious yourself in getting yourself to be different places, travel?
Yeah, for sure. Yes.
Sorry, I was going to say, do you find it a benefit to your artwork as well? Or just life? Is it just life?
It's beneficial to business to travel. Because some of the best are working and living, for example, out of the U.S., lots of the best are working in New York. And so when I get to go and hang out with, or like see the work over years of like, say, the Egg Collective, who are our colleagues, but also people that I really admire who have become friends. It's like, if you show up enough, then, you know, you can build friendships and long-lasting relationships. And some of the best are working and living in places that, you know, you need to go to often if you're wanting to roll at that level.
And would you say then, does it mean other people are missing out because they're not in those hubs? You know, like if you're not in LA or New York, you're far. Is that true?
Well, I know you have a concentration on Vancouver artists, for example, so we could talk more specifically about Vancouver. And the question could be, for example, I come back here with this insight from having gone to New York, let's say 10 times a year over 4 years or something like that. You have this other sense of what's possible and how big that could get, and also just rolling with people who are thinking at such a sort of global level. So you do miss out, of course, if you don't travel. And in the same breath, there's something about really bunkering down into your own city and, you know, working hard at where you are that can also get you quite far as well. So they're both good. That's
why I want to, it would be great. And I think whatever I can do to, whatever work I can put towards Vancouver to make it that it is the coolest city to go to for art. I would like to do that. And it sounds like you are doing it, or you have been, and you are, and you will be kind of. Well,
you and I live in a city that has deeply benefited from people doing that before us. So for the last 10 years, people like Mark Brand or people like Cause and Effect or who were sort of spearheaded Pechakucha. And there's all these different leaders in our community that were working a decade before our time to make sure that we could be in this kind of environment that we're in. And the Cheaper Show, with Graham Berglund. And so there's just different people who have, made an effort to make this place way cooler than it definitely way cooler than it used to be.
There's ways. We'll have to keep working.
More fun. We need to have more fun. Find ways to.
Do you think you were exposed to a lot more, I don't know, like ambition and work ethic when you did visit Toronto or New York?
Was I exposed to?
Yeah.
Well, some of it's just that some people who are that ambitious happen to live there.
Basically.
So like
Yeah,
Fernando
yeah.
Mastranglio and different people. I mean, there's lots of talented people here who I get to be around, but they're not, it's just different.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask if you, although I think you kind of mentioned it, but do you need struggle to make good artwork? Is that something, because when you're saying even being sober and how a little bit of chaos was something that, well, I guess maybe it was benefiting, was allowing you to make interesting work. And then it's almost like now, I guess, well, you called it chaos, but I wonder if it's also, there's certain struggle gone, so then to have something to say.
Mm-hmm.
So I should say the question again, but yeah, do you miss or do you need struggle to create artwork?
Yeah, that's right what I'm in right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really great question. And so the newest body of work that I've made is these vessels. And what happened for me was I went down to New York and I saw all of these guys who are wonderful, for the most part, wonderful humans. And they were sort of getting their careers elevated through making these vessels. And they were getting into these particular galleries and getting sort of all this notoriety and getting written about and getting showcased in certain venues and places that I've been trying to get into for years. And so I came home with this sort of frustration, for example, and then ended up painting these vessels. So what I did in order to use my frustration to its highest potential is I used my mother tongue, which is painting. And I thought to myself, well, how can I make the best work possible? That's through painting. And then I just started painting vessels, and there was a great response to the work. So it was a positive example of how I was able to kind of take this anger and flip it onto itself and sort of talk about a topic that I'm interested in, which is why are so many men still elevated in the gallery system? And we have so many women going through art school, for example, and where are women dropping off, and where are female artists not being represented, and their work being thought of as, say, not saleable, etc. So I'm always, for my whole career, I've been interested in these questions and have built that into the work that I'm making. So, but the other question about, so I have a newfound peace. And I carry that piece around with me now, and it's a great blessing. But like I mentioned, it's also quite boring.
Yeah.
So it's, but I'm right in the middle of that right now. So we'll see.
You mentioned boring, like that's because when life is good and you're comfortable and things are generally great, to find, that's why I mentioned struggle, is that to find something to speak about, I guess you have to get out of yourself, where that maybe that struggle is not, it's not you anymore, but even you speaking about anger, about how the kind of the system has been working, and even looking at numbers of people and women dropping out, but even, and then also just artists, and how many artists, the big topic is paying giant tuitions and then getting nothing out of it. There can be a lot of frustration. And so when I was asking about struggle, it's because myself as well, I think it's when I'm looking for something to speak about artistically, I realized I think I'm very, very, very fortunate to have life that's pretty good, and also living in Canada. So when it's so I call it struggle. I think there's probably many different ways to call it, but it's just something worthy of spending your time and then putting it out there, something that's worthy of time and to speak about, right?
Yeah. Well, I think that we can't force these experiences, and so, for example, some of the strongest work that I ever made was about, it was a body of work called A Break in Pace, and it was 13 pieces that I showed here in Vancouver, and a lot of that work was about the struggle that I was having, staying within a monogamous relationship, having children, being a woman, and moving your mind and your body in different directions, etc. So there was the work was essentially about longing, and longing that was coming from it was honest. It was stuff that was coming from the inside. And there was a piece in that, it was also about the struggle that it took me to make this so-called fortune, quote unquote. And so there was this piece where the woman's face looks very destroyed, and it's called the Fortune Maker. And she's this character, and there was a big sort of hole cut out of her head, and her face was sort of it was abstracted and kind of smushed around, and she had this androgyny to her. And the piece was about what it cost me to make this fortune. So from the outside, I'm perceived to have made money or made a living, etc., and the destruction and difficulty that caused me. And so all I did was translate what was actually happening to me and told the truth. And if you start with telling the truth, then people end up very much responding to the work. And that work was it was almost all sold right away, and it was there was a great response to the work. All that to say that I'm not in that place anymore. So I'm in a place of peace and happiness, what I also hear you saying though, that I think is maybe more interesting, and maybe where I'm headed, in the sense that, because I'm a bit older as well now, is like, what do people need to hear you say? Because it's not just about me and my own struggles, etc. So-called struggles. But what does the world need me to say at this moment in time? And do I have the capacity to use my voice that I've been given and this expansive platform to say something that's actually maybe more important?
I got too many questions in there, but I think where I'll have to go is that I have a quote from you, and I thought it was so cool because and your, I think, approach and how you make your art, and the quote goes, what's important is that the personal narrative translates so that others understand where I'm coming from. The goal is that people feel included, and then the work is made for them, that nothing is above them or unattainable. I thought it was, as an art practice, as a way of making art, really cool. And it sounds that what you're talking about right now is that you're making it for others, for the people.
Yeah. The greatest way to honor any gift that you've been given is to use it and exercise it on behalf of others, right? So it's not ours to hold on to, it's ours to give away. And we're just the more and more that I lean into being a conduit and a vessel for the gifts that have been given to me, then the more honest the work becomes, and the less effort is evident in the work, and then you're at service of others, which is a really wonderful way to be in flow. There must have been a lot, but what were some big changes that happened from that art show you're just describing to now? How is it that therapy?
Yeah, you found balance. It seems like it's.
Did I find balance? I'm not a fan of the word balance,
no,
but I don't want to. Well, because I run at 110%. If you're parenting and you're completely present, or you're screaming at your kid, and then you have to cram for an art show, and you don't have sex for 3 weeks because you're trying to do something else, and then you're completely passionate with your lover for a period of time because you're on vacation. Nothing is ever balanced, right? The point is that you're trying to make a life, and that the life would have evidence of someone who was concerned with there being, what I'm interested in is my expansion benefiting everybody around me, so that they also can see themselves expand and be reflected in that.
Do you think there's balance in the chaos?
You just want balance so badly.
I know it's impossible. It's one of the things where it seems like that we all reach for, but it's just not unattainable. Almost like the way, like the contempt and true happiness is, just because it's human nature, I think. But I'm curious, because 24 hours in a day, what are you gonna do, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what you're talking about. It's like certain things take priority, and that's it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you're all in it. And you've heard this said before, but it's true. Wherever you are not 100 other places, right? Yeah. So it's also about being honest with what can actually happen in this period of time. So while I was, say, passionately working in the Montreal studio, I was not parenting. I was not, responsible to other things in my life. And so it's being very, very honest about your time and where you're spending it. But then also, I think in the same breath, I see women in particular, but all of us sort of putting so much pressure on ourselves in terms of where we're spending our time, and making this really it's very serious. And I think we also need to just have fun too, and go with the flow, and enjoy like what we're doing today. I think we're both doing it out of a place of enjoyment. And then also then there's outcomes, but it's not outcome first, Yeah.
You still manage to have fun.
Yeah,
hopefully we'll laugh a lot. It's important. I'll do my best.
Yeah.
I heard a lot of the people that I know and certain coworkers, where the artists that I know, they're saying how after they had kids, they're telling me they almost couldn't remember what they're doing with their lives prior to having kids, and it's almost like for the perspective shift. And although I think I've asked more men about this than women, but where it's almost like they found a new purpose, or the artists who do make work, it's almost like the way they make work completely changes, because it's almost, before it was a lot more internal, where once they had children they realized it just opened them up to be a lot more external, and then maybe I'm guessing, but maybe just more aware for the world and and what they make at that point and after. Have you had a similar experience, or how was it for you?
My work, I find my artwork is not super determined by my having had children or not having had children, except for particular bodies of work where I've made a conscious point of particularly talking about being a mother. And even that role is it's still a role I feel like I'm trying on sometimes. It's less comfortable than just being myself. And I think that adjusting that costume, so to speak, is not as interesting to me. And that said, I spend a lot of time with a lot of other mothers, and I really enjoy the conversations that we have when we're able to be honest about, you know, who our kids are and how that's unfolding and what efforts we're making and where we're failing, etc. And you know, but I don't know if it's changed the exact artwork all that much.
Very interesting. And
all they do is take all of your time and money.
and then you still have to adjust. How do I make this painting quicker?
Well, that's the biggest thing. Is I think, okay, let's say one of the, and I'm thankful that you haven't asked this question, and you'll know not to now if it is on your list of questions. But you know, people, I think there's this romantic notion that artists are just sit around and they're inspired, right? So people will be like, oh, what do you make when you're inspired, or what inspires you, or whatever. And quite frankly, when you have children, you don't have time to sit around and be inspired. Like, I go in the studio when I work and I make a certain quantity of work, or I have outcomes that I want to achieve, either for myself or deadlines for my clients. Or let's be totally honest, I take a 50% commission, 50% from my clients for commissions. And then, if the rent is due at the end of the month, I have to finish the commission so that there's a timeline to things. And so I work in a very, I guess, a more fast-paced, logical sense than kind of sitting around and waiting to be inspired. And children definitely expedite that like jump to it. You got to do it.
They don't bring inspiration to you.
I'm inspired. I am inspired by my kids almost every day, but it's not in connection to my artwork. No.
Yeah. No, I know
it's different.
In reality, not everything has to feed into this bucket of being an artist kind of thing. Yeah. And in fact, it shouldn't, because then you're just kind of boring if all you do is art, really.
Yeah.
I think there's got to be. But even the conversation you mentioned with your daughter.
Yeah.
Imagine, like, it's such a cool moment. Imagine somehow trying to just. I mean, you can use words, but what if it was a piece of art? I think that's kind of.
Yeah.
There's probably ways, but.
Yeah.
It's just how you interpret stuff, I guess.
I guess I don't know if it's because I'm narcissistic, but the way that I interpret, though, like what experiences my children give me. So, for example, I'm working on this painting called "The Woman Divided on Two Boats," and so her feet are 1 foot on either boat, and the boats are obviously heading in sort of different directions. And so the autobiographical part of being a mother is very much about how I've internalized that and what I've kind of done with that as a result. And even then, it's quite rare. It's not about those external experiences that I have with my kids. Those for me are sound bites, and they're just fun to talk about. And I put them in my diary, and they change me. And they shift my perspective. I'm more thankful for my life, for example, with having had children.
That's huge.
Of course. It was super huge. And I'm a better communicator. So I was able to be, like, for example, as a boss, I'm a way better leader since I've had my children, because I know how to, and nothing phases me. You cannot, unless you puke on me, and, there's no, it's impossible to phase me. And so that's made me a very steady leader, which has really helped my business.
and it's kind of ironic that that has come from children.
I know.
And I mean,
It's
the
funny.
irony is right there, and
Yeah.
nothing else needs to be said.
For sure. For sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
I gotta keep learning. Honestly, you said I didn't ask the question about you being inspired, and I guess being an artist, I completely get it, because if you think you're waiting for inspiration, you never get anything done, basically. And in fact, I think when you when you talk to people and they tell you that I'm not feeling inspired, so I'm not making work, that's a kind of a sign that they've just done a difference. Like it's almost like I'm gonna sound arrogant, but it's almost like you don't get it. This is not gonna happen. You just gotta go there, just make doodles or something.
Yeah, exactly. I do believe there's a quote that I love by James Austen that says something, chance favors those in motion. The notion being that the more we're doing, making work. I've made so much shitty work, but very few people have seen it, because they just don't. I don't show it. So, but I've been practicing. And so secretly I've made, one of the reasons people will ask, why are you so successful? I've made literally thousands more paintings than most people. And if you only thought of that as practice, regardless of everything else around that, all of the clients and all of the shipping and all of the ideas and all of this practice of practicing has been my number one, greatest success. Am I the best painter in Canada? No way. But I'm practicing, right?
Maybe you're the best. It's
we
subjective.
We don't know.
Okay.
Yeah. Not for us to say.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that's the separation of like a professional artist versus.
You're right. Yeah.
It's that reality of you just have to make lots of mistakes to get something.
Yeah, for sure.
Good out of it. Yeah.
And also, I mean, I guess to be, I think you were avoiding saying it, but to be honest, if you're sitting around waiting for inspiration, that's an excuse. It's like sitting around waiting to go to the gym. That doesn't make any sense. It's the myth falls flat when you kind of sort of unpack it. It's like, that's not really how this is going to work. And I don't know why. In our industry, we allow people to get away with that, because it's you wouldn't sit around and just wait for a building to happen if you were an architect. There's work that you have to put in, so it's like, wow, I'm not really that interested.
Exactly. It's when you apply it to anything else, it doesn't work for some reason. For art, it still is.
Right. Which is why I mentioned I love that TED Talk by Elizabeth Gilbert, the elusive creative genius. It's just so funny and so frank and so kind of does away with all of those dumb myths that are around. Yeah.
Well, because basically you're not helping anyone. That myth is just hurting everyone.
Yeah.
And I think, and I do go back to it, I think the reason why I like being in the fine art and the commercial entertainment art world is that in the entertainment, in the art world, you'll never get away with that. You're going to show up to work and say you're waiting for inspiration, you're fired. What do you think is going to happen? And I really like the clear-cut professional way of it. Yeah.
I understand that. Yeah, I would definitely, I've kind of kept me on as an employee, because I show up to work and I've put in 6 days a week. So it's like, okay, I'll keep her, It's like, I would hire me.
There you go. Great. And I guess the more you work with people, the more I realize like you're talking about, whether it's being hardworking or reliable, it's not everyone, unfortunately. So
well, and I also have had the great pleasure of my clients keep me accountable, right? They want something delivered on time, but also I've had the great pleasure of they're quite high functioning humans. They are a doctor or somebody they're doing stuff, and they have expectations for how things run, and they sort of say jump this high, and so I'm like, okay, well, that's I guess what we're gonna do around here. That's the practice.
They'll take no excuses.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, why would they? No, you don't. Yeah.
On another, I stalk you on Instagram a little bit. It's called Research because it's a podcast, so it's all good, right?
Totally. Way less creepy.
That's right. But when you talked about, actually, I think it was about the bronze sculpture, you wrote that you're paying attention to what's missing in the market, and it says often paired with rigorous and soul-felt studio practice. I thought it was an interesting statement that you mentioned, that you do look out there what's in the market. And this is pertain to, you're talking about a piece that would have multiple versions of it, and so you are looking at a larger market, not just people looking for a painting. Is that a thought process you often have for design work, or is it for all the work that you create?
There's a few questions within that,
Yes,
because which is fine as long as I can keep track of them all.
Yeah.
But it's there's a few things. One is there's the process of being in my clients' homes. So I was, say, servicing them they would buy a big beautiful painting for above the couch, and then they'd want to spend less money on some drawings for the bathroom. So I was like, okay, I'll make some drawings. And so I started to make drawings, for example, and I don't make any prints. So for example, my drawings are all original, but they're around $750 each, 750 Canadian dollars. So they're less expensive than, say, a $6,000 painting above the couch, and so they should be. So I would start to look around the home and sort of see what was happening. And in the same breath, there's for example, there's not a lot of beautiful handmade rugs by artists. When I started making them 5 years ago, I saw that, to quote that, it was missing in the market. And at the same time, I was partnered with my business partner, the Burt brothers, on the rugs, and they had what I was missing, and I had what they were missing. And what they were looking for was a young, sort of up and coming, funky, interesting person to design a couple lines for them. And so we together sort of look at what's missing in the market and sort of end up making that work. And it's not forced. It's not a force like, okay, well, now we're going to make this because it's obviously not around. But it's that there's a curiosity around that particular medium. And then when you really look around and you go, if there is only black cars, why don't we start making some cars that are different funky colors and sort of see how that goes. So it comes from a place of curiosity.
And I find that to be correlating to just the business of art. I think it's...
Yes.
I think in the art world, it's often almost uncomfortable, that thought of looking for what's missing, but I don't think it should be, right? Just like you're saying, you're the first person to talk about money to the students, because why is it awkward? I don't know why it's become so. Yeah. But so I think so is this thought, right? Like, what's missing there?
Well, then I'll say something else that's also often perceived as awkward, which I think is really important. It's also that I was intentionally am trying to create passive forms of income, because I physically am hand making 98% of the income that's coming out of my studio, and this is not sustainable. It makes me tired, and it's also just not smart business. You're not. So I also was making a really thoughtful, a concentrated point of looking at ways, like whether it's the bronze sculpture or the rugs, that I could work with people who are excellent at what they're doing, like our weavers and the foundry. They're excellent at what they do, and taking that excellence and elevating it through design and maintaining that handmade quality. So not making something like, say, giclée prints, which I'm opposed to, and looking at that and being like, how can I do this and not have it made by my body, made by my hand, and just receive a check in the mail,
I guess it's uncomfortable because it does, where art has to be so personal. Maybe the uncomfortable part of that conversation is that if it goes too far from the original artist and becomes kind of loses its soul, because it's a pretty big conversation, but I guess that's where the uncomfortable part comes in, right?
I think that people, when it's not done well, and there's been so many examples of it not being done well, so we just kind of paint that all with one brush. So we say, okay, that's selling out, right? And whereas if you know me, and anyone who knows me and my clients and or follows my work, they know that there's a human who is making these as intelligent decisions as she possibly can to have a bronze sculpture look and feel like a drawing, and to hire real humans to make that is, in my opinion, not selling out. And so, first of all, that conversation is totally boring to me. That word is just not that interesting. And it's also that we're talking about a case by case basis,
of course.
and also that I have, made anyone who knows my career knows I've made a real mindful choice there, and with who I work with, because I've been offered lots of things that I've said no to. So
I think there's an honest way of creating work of this type, right? A large type of work where it's produced as copies, but still maintains its integrity. Is that why you're opposed to prints? You said.
Well, I just don't want to participate in planned obsolescence as well, right? So okay. I don't want to. My priority is that everything that's made out of my studio lasts a lifetime, or that's the intention. So I think that if you're making any product, if there's a spectrum of when things could get thrown away, having it last forever as your intention is probably the best way to sell things.
So you're ethical at the same time.
Well, that is one ethical thing that I believe in.
Just one. But just to go back to this conversation, I know so many artists, and I think most artists just want to have more time to make their own work. And if it means finding a way to create work that can be mass-produced, maybe not the right word, but that can be have multiple copies of, so you can have passive income to basically help you make more art. I think we all want it. So it shouldn't be uncomfortable, right? It's just, I guess in the end, it's how you do it. And that's why you say it's not black and white, sell out or not. And I know you don't like that term. I don't like it either, but it's just. Well,
it's like, what the other question that could be maybe more interesting, or like maybe let's think of somebody making a mural, for example. And if it's a black and white line drawing mural, for example, and they do the design and they get the job themselves and they set it all up and they rent the scaffolding and they organize everything and they have someone else like just paint the lines, and someone could go to the extent to say that that's not their work because it's not made by their hand. It's like the whether it is or it isn't, it's that argument to me, that judgment that someone might have on that being the artists or not is not that interesting to me.
That's very interesting.
Is it interesting?
I think, but I want to know your opinion then. So what do you think, or do you just not bother going to the conversation at all of what is art and what is not, and what is this person's art? Do you think about that?
I think that Banksy's done a great job to get us all thinking about that, or Jeff Koons. I think there's wonderful examples, that I find quite interesting and delightful and intellectual. I find them quite, like, I love that conversation, but in the same breath, I fully admit that it's not for me to say, and I think that them broaching those topics at all is really thrilling.
It's for you to say your opinion if you want. There's that space, and just because maybe they're getting a reaction, and it can often be people get frustrated as a reaction to certain pieces of art, and maybe some artists. We as artists are a little too serious or pretentious maybe about what the art is.
Yeah, I do think that, like, if Olivolo designs a mural and someone else paints it by hand, like, that's completely and entirely, in my opinion, her work. Like, it's in the same, and maybe that is just bridging it into design. So I know, for example, my friends who are furniture makers, they're not hand making each item, nor would anyone expect them to. They have 10, 12 person shops that are sawing the wood or sanding it by their own hand, but it's their own design. So it's the design of the name of the brand, which it takes years to elevate your name to that point. So it's like, I respect that enough to think that that's worth respecting in and of itself.
Maybe the issue then is just making sure you give credit to. I think maybe that's what it comes down to. Meaning, if there is like if you have a team of 100 working with you and then they say, "Oh, I just did it all in one day," maybe that's a problem.
Yeah, and I've definitely had that challenge before. Like, there's with the rugs, we've designed them. It's my ideas and my own. I'm saying move the blue over here and move the gray over there, and let's decide to do this more blush and more this and more that. It's completely birthed out of my own mouth, out of my own ideas. But there's 3 or 4 hands on that, and then the weavers that are also, you have to pay homage where you have to give credit where credit's due.
But you're happy to give credit to those people, and I love it. And it's because you pick like you said, the excellent people to work with, and I think that's how it should be, right? And I'm just I'm guessing maybe where the frustration can come from if someone didn't make their work. I don't know.
That's happening a lot right now in our design world, in our circle of colleagues and peers they're either ripping off or being ripped off, and it's happening, and they're getting caught, and it's it's sparking conversation because if you think about a couch, for example, there's only so many ways you can design a couch so that you can sit on it. So it often at times looks like people are copying, etc. Like, it's easier to kind of say that you sort of had to design something a certain way, and in the same breath, I see a lot of designers like not using their own unique. You have a bright, big, beautiful mind. You can use your own brain and not sort of steal ideas. So yeah, there's lots of that happening in our industry for sure.
And I think it's because I like to treat this pursuit art world seriously, and I think personally, if something does bother me, it's because I find that it's someone's making it a joke, and that's not wrong at all. This isn't like this is me saying my opinion. Is just I feel like the art world, the creating art that speaks. I think I just love the field. I love the artists who put their whole lives into it, and so when someone, whether it's ripping off someone or like kind of turns it into a joke, while sometimes a great conversation, personally I feel like look at the history of art. Look at how incredible it is, and if you're just kind of spitting on it, I don't know.
Yeah, to make it makes a mockery of all of the. And we, those of us who do take it seriously, and we stand on the shoulders of other, like for myself, I stand on the shoulders of other women who have come before me more recently in the last couple generations, and I take that very seriously as well, and I definitely respect that. And
I think we should. And in the end, it's just a matter of opinion, like who you care about. But I think that shows a mature artist. Anyways, I know you have to get out pretty soon, so I'll just throw a couple more questions.
Yeah, sure.
Unfortunately, never enough time. I did ask you about your ideal lifestyle or ideal situation. I love it. A basketball playing musician. What is your happy place?
Oh, well, I love being in my studio. That's like the cheesiest. I love being in my studio. I like writing, praying, thinking, reading. So the studio affords me. I really love yoga, and so the studio, my particular studio in Montreal, affords me a lot of those things that I love. And I love being at the ocean, swimming.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that West Coast.
It's where you're from. It's in your blood.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'll always jump in, so I love it.
You're very ambitious. So do you make, tell me some of your ambitious plans. Do you make 5-10 year goals? Something like that? No,
I just look 1 year. I'm only able to look sort of 1 year in advance. And the next goals are around being more present with my kids. I'm noticing how fast time is going. I mentioned they're 10 and 12. And so my goal is to be all around them a lot more. In order to do that, I'm going to have to work more smarter, and work less and make more money. So I know that everybody says that, but I'm actually kind of in a good spot right now where I could that's possible. And so I'm interested in that. Creatively figuring out how to do that and maximize my time so I can be with them and travel with them.
It's very, very exciting. Can't wait to. I'm curious to see what's next because you've got a lot of really cool work.
Yeah, there's a lot of good things happening. I
got the last one for you. What is advice you would have given your younger self before you went to post-secondary?
Before post-secondary? We were like 12.
No,
how old were we?
Oh, sorry. What am I like when you went to?
Oh, no, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right. Like
am I right? Okay.
A young adult.
Yeah.
Well, I'm thankful for what I worked hard. I think I would have quit drinking sooner. That probably would have been a good idea. Woulda, coulda, shoulda.
Hey, but you said it helped make art, so all good. It was worth it. It's a lot of fun times.
Yeah, it was good.
Sweet. That's advice. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking your time. It means a lot. I'm very happy to have you on here. I guess tell people how they can find you and your work.
My name is Zoe Pawlak, ZoePawlak, and my Instagram is my full name, ZoePawlak, and my website, thesame.com.
Very nice. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
My pleasure.
Good people, thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you all.
Yeah, thank
you. If you want to learn more about Creative Theory Podcasts, go to Instagram or Facebook. If you know artists I should speak to, let me know. Otherwise, thank you so much for listening, and talk to you in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.
Mask on my face,